All right. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. I was supposed to be presenting with my executive director. Regretfully, he has not made it here, so I'm flying solo today. My name is Kiara Wilson, and I am with the Correctional Education Association. And we are going to talk about our organization in association with Reentry. Today we're going to cover what reentry is, its purpose, define what correctional education is, and also discuss our organization, give you a brief background on recidivism and our organization as a whole. So, as many of you know, reentry is the process of reentering something, and more importantly with us, someone into society. So correctional education refers to the variety of programs that inmates are offered while they're incarcerated. So that is from basic skills for their GED, make sure when they are released that they have a diploma. Right now, we have 3 companies that we work with. That's GED Testing Service, HiSET, and the ABE test. Depending on what state inmates are incarcerated depends on the test that they're going to take that is going to provide them with the diploma once they're released. And some of our facilities that we currently work with, they have programs where some of the inmates have the possibility of getting a full degree depending on the school that they're enrolled in. And we are also working with technology companies right now to provide tablets to our inmates so they can complete their degree and all of their homework. So by the time that they are released, they will have either a bachelor's or master's degree. So CEA, Correctional Education Association, we are the leading professional association for both juvenile and adult correctional education. We represent juvenile and adult teachers. And sometimes when politics fall into the right places, we provide legislative information to decision makers and lawmakers. Our mission is to prepare students for successful reentry into society and also to provide all of the necessary resources to the teachers that work within the facilities. We host 2 annual conferences, our leadership forum, which is normally held in the springtime, and our summer conference, which is international. And last year we had someone come from Australia to talk about the processes defined that they have within their country. So we also provide legislative support to decision makers, and our past executive director, Stephen Stewart, worked very, very close with Sean Addy. He is the US DOE chairperson right now. Our current goals is to be the leading professional organization for educators in criminal and/or a juvenile setting. Right now, we're also working on expanding our reach to jails because a lot of the inmates, once they are processed, they are in the jail facilities a lot longer than they're supposed to be. So they're working on getting normally their high school diploma while they're in jail, and once they're transferred to their final destination, they'll work on normally their associates and sometimes their bachelor's. We'll skip over this part. Our philosophy is to make sure that the programs that we are providing to our teachers, it will provide all of their students with the most information that they can receive at a time, because in the facilities, the inmates follow the basic school schedule that students do normally. They go to school 9 months out of the year. And during those 9 months, we want to make sure that they are receiving the best information, and we provide the training to our teachers to make sure that they are providing them the correct information in a timely fashion. All right, a brief history on CEA. My executive director has been with this company, our acting executive director has been with this company for over 20 years. I've been with this association for about 10 years, and he is normally the one that goes over all of this information, so I do apologize. I will have to read from the screen for most of these next couple of slides. But as you can see, the annual business meeting, I'm not too sure about that, so we're gonna skip over this for now. All right, so President Hoover, he started the correctional education in the prison systems back in 1929. Everything began with him because he thought that, hey, you know what? We have our inmates and we need to make sure that once they are released, they can be an effective citizen. So we're not have to worry about them going back and being back in a facility within 10 months or sometimes 6 months. Then President Roosevelt in the 1930s, he provided the funds for the first state prison so they could run the program. Majority of the funds that are provided has to come out of the facility itself. It's not normally provided through federal funds. So it comes from the state, and sometimes it comes from the institution itself, especially privately owned jails. Okay, so in 1930, forerunner of CEA within the APA, which is now ACA, American Correctional Association, they were the forerunners that started all of this. We have standards that we go to the facilities and make sure that their education programs are up to par for every standard that they have. Now, if they pass all of our standards for the educational purposes for ACA, they pass the educational portion directly. So ACA covers everything from how they're housed to how many people are in one specific unit. We just focus on the education portion to make sure that they are receiving their education classes at least 2 times a week, minimum, and make sure that they are receiving the credit hours that they are supposed to get the barbering classes. Sometimes they have cosmetology. They also have the culinary portion as well. This is Austin McCormick. He is the founder of Correctional Education, and he was a forerunner of our organization. He believed that it is important to empower the educators within a correctional setting to make sure that the inmates are receiving everything that they need to receive. Dr. Lane Murray was the first female president of CEA. Currently, our president, Peggy Myers, she has been running for 2 years, and she will step down, and we have another female president coming behind her. A lot of women are getting more involved in correctional education within our organization. Before, it was all men. Now our board currently holds 19 people, and out of those 19, it's 15 women. So, as you can see, it's a total different change. Before, a lot of men, our entire board was full of men, and we only had 1 woman. But now, majority of our board is female. So, we have one other president. Her name is Denise Justice. She ran twice and got reelected both times. It was a 4-year time period between her election. And Wyndham School District is a separate district within Texas. They have their facility, but they run their internal school district within the school, and they also have ties to the local community colleges. And Dr. Osa Coffey was hired as the first person for corrections desk in the US DOE. And she was also the first executive director of CEA. From the time period that she was hired, we have had 2 other executive directors, Dr. Stephen Stewart and Morris Dews. Currently, Morris Dews is our acting executive director. And Dr. Coffey was appointed the superintendent of VA DOC, and our current executive director worked for Virginia DOC as well. So we have a lot of ties to Virginia and DC because of the legislative purposes. And in 1980, CA emerged as a national presence for correctional education. And in 1990s, prison populations reached an all-time high. The more prisons were built and teachers were hired. We want to make sure that we don't have to build any more facilities. The less facilities that we have, hopefully all of these inmates can be reintroduced into society as productive citizens and have the capability of holding jobs and making sure that they are able to work with us and not back in the situation that they were before. Now, prison budgets have always been a high concern. 9 times out of 10, their budgets work for hosting a certain amount of inmates, but more inmates that come into the system, they have to figure out how to cut budgets. Normally, the first budget cut is with correctional education, regretfully, because a lot of the facilities, they look at it and they say, hey, we have to make sure that we can host them, feed them, clothe them, and make sure that their basic necessities are met. And regretfully, correctional education is one of the first processes to go. But in Ohio, where Denise Justice, one of our past presidents, was, she uses our website and all of the studies that we have had and hosted to fight for funding for these different programs so our inmates have the possibility of receiving the best education that they possibly can during their incarceration. Now, in 2000, CA released the 3-state recidivism study that was between Ohio, Iowa, and Idaho. And during that time period, that's when our term reentry was coined for CEA. Now, we are affiliated with ACA, AJA, EPA, NASLIN, ACE, and we just started this one with IFECSA in Australia. Their prison system is very different in Australia compared to the practices that we have in America. And surprisingly, the international representatives that we have with our organization, they look at our practices a lot different because education is not the cornerstone of an inmate's incarceration. In a lot of other countries, they push education a lot harder than we do. They want to make sure that the inmates have the best education that they can until they are released, and when they are released, they have jobs waiting for them. Regretfully, here in America, we do not have that same process. Sometimes the inmates can get through a trade program, but as soon as they are released, they don't have a job waiting for them. So if we have the possibility of getting more companies to hire inmates once they're released or to work directly with the facility to make sure that all of their information is correct. Once they're released, they have their birth certificate, their social security card, as well as the basic needs that they have for their funding, then they'll be able to work with our organization to set that up. So right now, that is one of our goals, is to work with construction companies as well as some of the local salons and some of the local barbershops, because those are certain skills that our inmates are learning. As far as our competition, we are the only organization currently that focuses on correctional education and promoting the resources necessary for the teachers. CEA works with a lot of other we have a lot of other affiliations, but we are the only one that is directly for the teachers. We were built by correctional educators for correctional educators. Everyone that is currently on our board of directors works either in a facility, a community college that services our inmates in correctional settings. Right now, we serve 28% of juveniles. We are working with detention centers, but they're a lot harder to work with because they are more focused on the family justice portion, and they don't necessarily include the juveniles as a correctional institution. And 72% of the inmates are adults that we work with. Now, out of that 72% of adults, we have about 28% of women and the rest is men. Now, a lot of the male facilities have a lot more correctional education programs. The female facilities host a lot of information that has to deal with childcare and nurturing and motherhood and things like that, because we have a lot of females that go into the prison system while they are pregnant, and they want to make sure that once their child is born, they'll go into the system or go with a family member, and once they're released, they have the possibility of getting back into their lives once they're stable again. It has been a big push for the programs that we host to make sure that these female inmates have the capability of having a solid family once they're released. As far as the males, we provide a lot of the institution provide a lot of programs to make sure that they have the time to interact with their children. And once they receive different certifications and jobs, they have time reduced off of their sentence, so it's early release. Now, with our organization, CEA, we have our membership, and we provide journals that have different studies that are released. We have our monthly newsletter that goes out, and then we also have a quarterly newsletter that goes out that provides the most information that's going on nationwide in different states. We have most of our involvement in our first region, that is up north, so New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. Then we have Region 3, which is Ohio and Idaho. Most of our support comes from the East Coast with CEA, because they have a lot of different facilities. As far as federal maximum security facilities spread throughout the US, they provide more programs for educational services. Regretfully, the maximum security facilities do not allow their inmates to use tablets and things like that. Right now, we're working with a lot of different tablet companies to provide content to the inmates so they can still do all their work inside of their cell, and they don't necessarily have to go to a classroom. It's pretty much having a virtual avatar that sits there and guides the inmate through their assignments to make sure that they get everything done. Then everything is given back to the teacher. The tablets are given back to the teacher, and then they're uploaded. Teacher grades everything, and then it's sent back to the student. That way they don't have access to the internet. You don't have to worry about anything getting out, email, anything like that. And it's all on an internal network, so they don't have the possibility of getting into Google or things like that to do other research. It's a it's a confined internet, for lack of better words. Now, most of our inmates that have gone through our programs, they have sometimes come back to CEA, come to our conferences, and given their success stories, because it's a long journey for them. It's a very long journey for them. Just to get their basic high school diploma is a long journey. Trying to find institutions that are willing to work with the inmate is very hard, but with technology and these tablets that we're starting to use, it is opening up a new horizon for a lot of inmates, specifically the state level institution. Federal and private prisons are harder to get into sometimes with tablets, regretfully, because they're concerned about the infrastructure and also concerned about the inmates having the capability of breaking into it and hacking it. So right now we're still working on that, and our conferences that we're holding, we're providing our teachers with the most information that they could get for the new process for the GED. For instance, that test has changed. It is a lot harder than it was before. The criteria to get your GED is more in-depth information. So if you pass your GED, once you get that certificate, you can go on into your associate's degree, depending on how you scored on your GED. So it's a progressive but slow process, and we're constantly fighting to get more funding and to get more involvement with the public. Because if we have more people involved with our organization, we can provide more programs to the inmates. regretfully, some of the states down south are not willing to open up and provide new education programs to the inmates. There are a couple of colleges that are trying to work with some of the southern states right now to give their inmates more information. But they are dealing with the distance from the community college to the facility itself. Some of the teachers that work in the local community colleges are going out to the facilities and working with the teachers there to provide them more information to give to the inmates, because a lot of these places are still using paper and pencil. So some of these facilities, they still have typewriters. They don't have computers. And sometimes if they do have computers, they have to pay for it through their commissary accounts in order to use it. So some portions of their education process have to be funded through their families, and on other ends they work, but you know, the inmate jobs, they only bring in a couple of dollars per hour. Sometimes it's under $3 per hour, depending on what program they're in and what state they're in. So they have to reach out to as many resources as possible. We try to give them information, free resources for them to study, and we will send out packets to the inmates once they reach out to us. Now, our organization, normally our members join, but today I just want to give you guys any information on CEA. Our board of directors, we are going to meet this coming weekend, and we are looking to send out pamphlets to just different educational resources in different facilities. Right now, we want to get a list of all of the jail associations, and we are working on all of the state directors in every state to make sure that they are spreading the information to their facilities to let them know there is a different way. We have different tablet companies that you can work with. There is with different ways to get fundings. There is a possibility of your inmates applying for a Pell Grant. Now, depending on why they are incarcerated in the first place, depends on if they'll be able to get approved for it, but that's partial funding towards their education. You need to let your inmates know that it is possible that they can get an associate's degree at minimum by the time that they're released. Yes, it's going to take a long time. Yes, it's a lot of back and forth with mailing and shipping things, but the educational director that is within the facility will help the inmates get all the information that they need. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. Let me face my, let me face you because I'll be facing some other people. Could you hand the mic up? Okay. Thank you for this presentation, and I'm glad that I attended. My name is Pius. I'm from Nigeria, but I just concluded my PhD, University of Pretoria in South Africa. And what I worked on, what I researched on, looks familiar. I actually worked on crime victims, compensation for crime victims by the state. And so that's why I said I was glad that I attended this section. One of the questions that I have is, your organization is purely for offenders. You don't talk about, what about the education of the crime victims after they have been victimized? What happens to them? Did you just forget about them and not concentrate? I have two other questions. When have you taken them? You now just concentrate on the offenders. That's number one. Number two, after these people have been corrected and released into the society, is there any rate of recidivism? You know what I mean? Any reoffending after you have educated them? Then, lastly, I mean, you talked about your conferences. When are they coming up? Do we have any information? Can we have information on them? Thank you.
Well, to address your first question about the offenders, right now it is our focus to deal with the offenders and the teachers that work with them. Regretfully, we do not reach out to the victims because we are not equipped to do that. We work directly with the teachers, and our teachers are educators, and they work with giving some of these inmates the basic skills. Some of the inmates do not have the capability to read past the 3rd grade level. So we want to build their understanding and build their education to make sure that they are up to par for the basic needs. Some of them don't know how to count money. That's why they have gone down the road that they've gone. So we focus strictly on the offenders, but more importantly, we focus on the educators to make sure that they have their training up to par. All of the conferences that we host provide them with continued education credit, and the teachers in every state have to have a certain number of credits that they have annually to make sure that their certificates are current and their teaching certificate for that state is current. As far as our upcoming conferences, our next leadership forum will be in Madison, Wisconsin, and that is March 18th to the 21st. And our summer conference, we're still working on the definitive dates, but that will be in Georgia, and we're trying to figure out whether it's going to be in Savannah or in Atlanta. But that is normally going to happen between as early as July 15th and as late as August 3rd. And what was your third question?
Recidivism.
And our recidivism rates, we don't have a definitive for every state, but for the study that we did, the recidivism, it was reduced by at least 32%. So we do not have a lot of inmates that go through the education programs that are released and say, hey, I'm gonna go back to the lifestyle that I had before. They're released with an empowerment for themselves because they've accomplished something that they felt that they couldn't accomplish before. They make sure, hey, I have my GED now. I can at least stand up and I can go and get a job. I might not have the best job, but I have something, where before they didn't have anything at all. Some of the other offenders, they are released with a bachelor's degree or with a master's degree. Some of our offenders that have to deal with lifelong sentences, they still get their master's degrees so they can go and teach other inmates. So they can provide resources to the other inmates, and they are the teacher's assistants. No, they are not allowed to upload the work, but they're allowed to tutor other students. So they are a resource to the teachers and to the facility because they're going to be there for a very long time. So I can, if you email me, my email address is above. I can provide you with our case study for the recidivism rate for our three-state study. Any other questions?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Andre Howard. I actually just had two basic questions. My first question was what kind of classes are being provided? So I guess I more so want to say what's a blueprint for a basic lesson plan, if you're able to tell me that. Because I know sorry, I know earlier you were talking about you're trying to have people in society that's associated with barbershops and salons and construction and stuff like that. So I guess I wanted to just know what kind of specific classes are being provided.
As far as the classes are concerned, for let's say our barbering classes, they go over the basics of how to wash hair, how to cut hair, and then once they get through their basic class, they are allowed to use clippers. Now, our instructors have to be very, very careful when they allow these students into these classes because these men and women are brilliant. They know how to take the basic thing and turn it into anything. So they have the capability of unscrewing the clippers, getting the razor blade out, and taking it back to their cell and using it for whatever they could possibly come up with. So it is an incentive for these inmates to make sure that they are on their best behavior, because if not, they'll get kicked out of the class. So once they pass their intro class, they go on to how to do the basics of a basic haircut, and they're just learning everything that they'll need to be able to work within a barbershop. And the same thing goes for cosmetology. And as far as the culinary courses, they cover the basics. It's a lot harder for the inmates to work within the culinary portion. It depends on the facility, because of course you have so many different weapons. You have to deal with the stoves and all of that. It's whether the facility is willing. Now, our culinary courses have only been within the minimum security facilities only. Now, as far as the basic GED classes and things like that, they follow the structure that is provided by the state and federal resources as well. So they'll go over the basics of comprehension, reading, English, literature, all of that. And as far as the math, they go through the basics, and they'll take them because one of our teachers, she was our Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Rhea Bowman. She has dealt with inmates that have come into her class that were not able to read a book that a 5-year-old could read. And by the end of the class, she made sure that that inmate was able to read and able to understand everything. Once they got through that book, she'll sign the book and give it to them so they can keep it. So this is the first book that you read. This is the first book that you got through. Don't give up, keep going. It's a lifelong journey. Education is a lifelong journey. Don't give up, don't stop. It is important that our teachers instill that into their students, their inmates, because once they understand that just because you're done with my class does not mean that this journey is gonna stop. Once you're out of my class, you're gonna go on to another teacher. Once you're done with that teacher, you're going to eventually be released. Once you are released, continue your education process. And a lot of times we make sure that when the inmates are released, that they are released with all of the courses that they have completed so they can go on to community colleges sometimes and other universities and finish their education. Because sometimes they're released in the middle of their degree program and they have to continue the work in order to get their degree. So they follow the basic structure that is provided by the state for all of their classes. Any other questions?
Hello, I'm Ron Winkleman, and I'm actually here with my wife, who's presenting. I'm a factory worker. I work in a factory. We got factories all around the world. So I'm I'm probably the oddball out here, you know, with all the attorneys and all you guys. So my question to you is, and I found it interesting how Australia works it, where they have jobs waiting.
Well, no, that's not necessarily in Australia. It's different facilities all over.
But some do. So how do you approach different companies is my question on, you know, maybe hiring, you know, some of your newly acquired students who have maybe gotten their GED and such.
Okay. Morris.
Yes. And maybe what kind of pushback do you get from a company?
Okay. I would like to introduce you to my executive director, Morris Deuce. Do you have, or did you have any facilities that have programs when the inmates were released that they go directly into the workforce?
Most of our programs, well, I'm sorry I'm late, by the way. But most of our programs, we started working with them in reentry while they're inside. And a lot of times we have employers who interview or talk to or work with or let us know what they're looking for. And we kind of hook them up when they get out. You know, if they get on parole, we'll make sure that their PO knows. And a lot of them, especially construction, they go to work. Because when they leave us, like in Virginia, when they leave us, they have certifications, OSHA certifications, NCCER, master plumber's license, master electrician, and they can go to work. Sometime, if they can't find a job, we equip them, they can start their own business. But, you know, we have employers, especially construction, who's always asking for people. They'll call us and ask us for 100 people if we don't have that many getting out sometime, but we'll direct them maybe to another state or somewhere. But yes, a lot of employers will hire them or talk to them before they're released.
And also, it depends on the state. If the facility is willing to work with inmates, sometimes they reach out because they know that this specific facility is going to provide the training that they need for them to have more employees once they're released. Now, sometimes we can reach out to facilities, but it's not facilities, I'm sorry. Sometimes we can reach out to companies to find out if they would be interested in working with the facility as a partnership. So they can provide employment. Sometimes they're willing, sometimes they're not. Of course, it depends on the level of their sentence, depending on how long they were incarcerated, why they were incarcerated in the first place. So depending on the type of offense, sometimes is either a yes or no whether they are willing to work with the facility itself.
You said earlier that you make recommendations to government policy makers
Yes.
and all of that. What has been their reaction? I mean, what assistance, have they offered? If you, do they accept your suggestion? Do they accept your curriculum? I mean, the government, the state. I mean, how did they help you? How did they assist you in this?
It depends on their past. Do I need this? Okay. It depends on their past. Sorry. It depends on the past experience they've had. A lot of employers have had experience, and they will basically take anyone that's recommended because they know the programs, they visited the facilities, and they know some of the people that they're looking at. So for example, if they say, well, I've hired 10 people and all of them worked out well, so I'll hire anybody that you recommend. That doesn't mean that everybody works out, but that means that they will give them a chance. Because when we ask, if they haven't approached us, we will say, especially if we know them one-on-one, we'll say, will you give him an interview or her an interview? And if it just for the experience, if you hire them, great. But if you don't, at least they will get some experience interviewing, so they will kind of know how to approach the next employer. Most employers, I'll give you an example. In Virginia, we've got the only surveying program in the country behind the walls. I talked to a surveyor, and he said, well, I'll give him an interview, but I'm laying off. I don't have anybody. Sent the guy down. He got a job. Even though they were laying off, he got a job. Basically because we teach and we help the facilities around the country. We give them research, we give them whatever they need to help, but as a teacher, when I was inside the classroom, we give them all the basic tools. We give them tools that the employers were telling us that guys come out of college, for example, doing surveying, they don't know how to set up a level or a transit. They want to be the party boss because they have a bachelor's degree. Our guys learn from the ground up. And so when they go to a company, they can start at basic entry level because that's what all of our programs all across the country, that's what hires advertise. If I tell you, I'm sending you this guy, he's got basic entry level skills. It's really not true. But if I tell you this man is a top level employee, it has all, and you looking at it, you say, wait a minute, I thought you told me he had more skills than basic. So everything we do is billed as entry level, which means they can start doing anything and work their way up. But most of these guys have the skills, and the girls, they have the skills sometime above what the employer's employees have. And we have had situations where after, say, 6 months in the construction, these guys were promoted to project manager. They managed the project, man, $10, $12 million projects. Only been out of prison 6 months. But, they're older, they're not teenagers. These guys in their 30s and 40s. They have some work experience, they have some maturity, which means that they know this is their last shot. So we've had good luck with them. Not everybody. One of them asked me, we work with clients. How do I know that this guy is not going to molest my client? I said, you don't. But how do you know the guys you have won't? Because they haven't been locked up doesn't mean that they won't. So I'm just saying, I'm not telling you this person will not reoffend. He has the tools not to, but it's his choice. We can't do that. So, but some of them are receptive, some are not. Some jobs they can work on, some they can't because they can't get a security clearance. Did that answer? Sure. Okay.
We have worked with some of our government officials, and they come to us to either work on different case studies to try to get more funding for different programs that they want to implement nationwide. So they work with CEA to try to come up with a specific case study on one specific topic, and then we help them with the research, help them implement a test run in one of the many facilities that we work with through our education programs and some of the people that are on our board sometimes. And from that, we get the research that's necessary, and then they take it back to the legislative level to try to get laws passed and made. Any other questions? Sure.
Okay.
Do you want to run back there?
I'm not going to go back over it unless there's some questions about it.
There were some slides you missed, and you said when it comes, we will be able to.
Yes, we can go back. We could talk about the history of CEA.
That one.
Yeah.
You didn't do those?
Oh, crap. I didn't do the history.
That's just during the 76th Annual Congress of Correction in Detroit in 1946. It's basically when the Correctional Education Association was formed. There was another committee chaired by Pius, and he felt that it could better be served by another entity, so therefore correctional education came into play. It really hadn't formed yet, but it was getting there. That's when it was introduced. His committee was dissolved and correctional education was created in 1946. Did that, you explained the rest of it, right? Okay. We've been around for a long time. Correctional education has been around since the early days when they first came up with the prison system. It just wasn't called correctional education. It was done by the church, which felt like people needed to, when they committed crime, they needed the time to collect their thoughts, to think about what they have done. So they started out with isolation, put them in a cell for 23 hours a day, and they were supposed to just think about what I've done. And then they could go outside. They had a little garden that they worked, or some project. So that's how they kept them busy. They had no contact with anybody else. No other inmate had no contact. When they went to chapel, they sat beside each other, but there was partitions between them, so they couldn't see each other. And then they found out that didn't work. Then they started more social programs, and they kept building. And then, what's his name? I forgot his name. No, not him. You keep going. Austin McCormick. Austin McCormick, when he was appointed, he visited some prisons just to see how they were doing, and and he just came back. There were no programs for him. There was nothing for him to do really, to prepare them to get out. So that's when he started, basically the education in prison. He promoted it, and but until then, there was even a situation in corrections to where when you got caught, it's called benefit of clergy. If you got caught for committing a crime, if you could recite a Bible verse, they would let you go. So you only had to know one Bible verse, because they figured if you were that side outside of the Bible and religion that you would not be able to be saved anyway. That's when they were putting you in stocks and putting you on public display to disgrace you and all of that. All that used to be part of it was prison. It was a punishment system, not a rehabilitation system. That's where with Arthur McCormick and others, that's where it came to, rehabilitation. And education is really the main rehabilitative tool. It's the only rehabilitative tool, because you can do anything you want. If you don't get it here and learn some skills and learn how to take care of yourself and learn how to do, you're gonna always, your alternative is gonna be just be a predator on somebody else or whatever. You have to, the old African proverb, you give a man a fish, he eat for a day, teaching the fish, he for life. That's the philosophy behind that, the rehabilitative system. And we've had great success throughout the country with education. As she said, with research programs, we did the 3-state recidivism study that shows that that inmates that take education courses while in prison recidivate at a rate 20 to 30% less than the guys who didn't. So, and we also found out that if you're 45, 50 years old, you don't come back anyway. You age out. You're too old to commit a crime, or either you stay in for life. But education has been a proven tool to reduce recidivism, which reduces the cost of prisons. So it should be, education is something that should be highly invested in, but we have to fight every year. Each individual state, because when they start cutting budget, the first thing they cut is education in prison. The fight that we had with reentry was they had to, when Correctional in Virginia decided they wanted to do reentry, they took education because they didn't know what to do with reentry. So when they came in with education, they started running all these programs, and the guys got to a point where either you go to school or you go to this program. Now you go to this program, it teaches you behavior, and all of that. But I'm very well behaved. I know how to present myself. I have no skills. What am I going to do? So what we said is, let us finish the program, get them a certificate or and whatever, and then you complete what you're doing. But we had the big argument.
Some of the inmates may not have the mental ability to cope with Western education. Do you have in your curriculum the vocational training skills for some of them that may not be able to obtain a degree? You have vocational, like acquiring skill, learning?
Yes. 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 Different states have different areas, but yes, they do.
Morning. So I'm from New York, or we're from New York, and Governor Cuomo a couple years back talked about free education for prisoners for reentry. And of course, New York went, oh my God, why am I paying for prisoners to go to college when I have to pay for my own kid to go to college? Why do they get it? Because they're prisoners. We should hurt prisoners, not help prisoners. So reentry is always a problematic area for politicians to talk about, because we like to punish prisoners. We don't like to help prisoners. But I wondered, most prison education is a leverage for prisons. They say, here, you go into this program, and then you'll get out early. So prisoners, very often, at least in New York State, they don't get into education to be educated. They get into education to get out early. And I think that model does not allow for prisoners who actually learn. It allows for prisoners who get out early. So education as leverage is not as helpful as education as a way to improve yourself. So I wondered if your organization actually has requirements in there for your educational programs, that they not be for leverage, but they be education for the sake of education. Thank you.
Well, we don't really dictate to states how they operate, but different states operate differently. As I say, Virginia has no parole.
Really?
You know,
Oh, wow.
but we have a number of inmates who go up for parole every year because they under the old system. But if they get out on parole and commit a new crime, they come back under the new system, which means if they got life in prison, they have life in prison. If they got 20 years, they got 20 years. But if they have 10, 15, 20 years, education does not get them released early. And in most states, it doesn't. Now, as far as college, I heard the same argument. So the way states do, but our normal argument is this. Inmates in prison, they don't get their college and education all paid for free. They have to pay for it. Now, the college and universities may give them a discount, but normally they pay their own tuition. They have to make the grades to pass and all that. It's not something that's offered as part of their release package, but it's what they want to do. And now that the Pell Grants are back in certain states, that'll help. But they still have an obligation to pay a certain amount of money. So when I was in college, I used to hear all the time, why do they get free education when I had to pay for mine? And I said, first of all, the education is not free. Second of all, if you think it's a free education, go commit a crime and go to prison. You know? I mean, if you think it's free, you know, but they never understood it like that. They said, I had to pay my own. I said, I had to pay my own tuition too. But I understand that. But these are people we're trying to give a second chance. But it's not a free ride. Even the vocational classes, academic classes, studies that they get. Do you want to be locked up in prison? You can't get up at night to go get a glass of water when you want to. You can't go to the bathroom if you're somewhere unless you ask permission. You can't really do anything. Now you look at it, you say, well, they got it made. No, they don't. Lock yourself in a room for 24 hours, not being able to come out, and see how you feel. So I don't want to go to prison to get a free education. But that was my comment when they said that. But yes, New York is different. Massachusetts is different. Virginia is different. But we have the same issues all across the country. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I was curious because, I find reentry to be just such a basic, fundamental right if we want to reintegrate prisoners back into society. And to talk about reentry is so difficult because so many people don't have an interest in reintegrating prisoners.
No one has an interest in reentry or in the inmate population unless they have a connection to it. If you have relatives, friends, anyone that's in the system, then you have an interest. Most people think that people that go to prison deserve to be in prison. That's why they're there. But I've gotten calls, my son is going to so-and-so prison in so-and-so state. How can he get involved in an education program? My first answer is once he gets in the system, he has to talk to his counselor and then see come up with a plan. I said, but he's not going to walk in the door going to school. He's got to earn it. You don't go to prison and say, okay, well, what do you want? You can give him a parole plan, come up with a plan, but you say, well, the first thing I want to do is I want to go here to this vocational class and learn to be a brick mason. Okay. We've got a waiting list of about 500 people, so when you think you're going to get to go? Then they get frustrated. But after a while, 2-3 years, then they can start working. But you don't walk in the door of prison and start it, all right, I'm starting to rebuild. You start rehabilitation, but you don't start doing what you want to do. It's not that type of system. And some people don't understand that.
For a certain time period, I worked for Montgomery County Correctional Facility. and I had to enter in all of the inmate requests to be put into the classes. The pile of paperwork that I had was almost this high because there are so many inmates that want to get into the classes, but they fill it very quickly, and it's always dependent on your behavior and how long you're going to be there. Sometimes they are not allowed to get into the program because they've gotten into an altercation while they were incarcerated. They will get kicked out. They will lose their right to be in that class. So it is a very long and time-consuming process for the inmate, and it is our goal to make sure that, like I said before, that our teachers provide them with everything they can, but that's once they get into the classroom. It is a very, very long process for some of these inmates to get into their favorite class or the class that they want to have. Sometimes they take what they can get, not necessarily what they want, because this class is open, but this class isn't. So it's all dependent on the facility and, more importantly, the state that they're in. And I know that we need to wrap up soon, so do we have any last-minute quick questions?
I had one last quick one.
Of course.
What I wanted to know, I know earlier you were saying that there's not much participation with like federal maximum security prisons, and I wanted to know, like, has there been any progress with them actually thinking or maybe contemplating actually working with the CEA or organizations similar?
Well, as far as our federal maximum security facilities, it depends if we have teachers that are in the facility. If we have teachers that are part of our organization that work within the facility, or if they have teachers within their facility at all. So once they have an interest in opening the classes, depending if they have the space and the time and the funding, then we can work with the teachers to make sure that they have enough training to be able to provide their inmates with the correct level of education. So it's all dependent on that specific facility and if they are even open to have teachers, because there is a hiring freeze in a lot of the facilities and institutions right now.
We are a professional organization, so the way we advertise ourselves is we're the only correctional education professional organization in the country for teachers. It's run by teachers, for teachers, correctional educators. So anybody in the federal system, in local jails, can be, we can participate with us. They can be members. The individual jails could be if they wanted to, but we don't push, but we represent teachers. We represent educators, people who work in the field of correctional education. That's who we represent, that's who we work, we provide training, workshops, as she said, conferences, research. The individual facilities sometimes will support. We have had members from the federal system. If the system supports them going to conferences, going to training, using training as an
incentive for
what she said. Lost the word. But anyway, in-service training, and all of that, professional development. We offer all of that. And individually, whether the institution supports it or not, the individual person can either pay out of their pocket. Some of the institutions reimburse them. It just depends on the state. But we work with anybody that's involved, have a concern about, wish to get involved with correctional education.
And if you all have any more questions, I do have my business cards. You're welcome to call me, text me, email me with any other questions that you have. And I'll be more than glad to send any information out, okay? Thank you so much.
Again, thank you for your participation. I know that she did a great job. I wasn't concerned about that. I was concerned about getting here.